Hi, everyone. I'll give you a minute to settle in. Wow, you settled fast. Good work. Uh, Everybody here okay? Does that sound all right? Okay, good. My name is Dave. I'm one of your Yamhill County Historical Society board members, and welcome to our quarterly program. We call it Secrets of the Past. We've been running this for a couple of years now. People seem to like it. I like it. Yep, got another one. Good. And welcome. There are beverages and snacks over here. And if you're interested in anything else, membership and the like, come on up to the desk and see us. We haven't done this with Secrets of the Past. This is a double header, 2 presentations tonight. So we have a lot to get through, but what great stuff to get through. This one we're calling, although you might already know this, Bricks and Locks, Boosting the Towns of Willamina and Lafayette. And I thought I saw a lot of new faces, at least new to me when I walked in. Who is here from Willamina? Welcome, Willamina. How about Lafayette? Lafayette. You guys should meet and greet. And I asked that. Our first presenter is also a historical society board member, a local historian, and quickly becoming the rising star of Secrets of the Past presentation hosting. I think he's done definitely the majority of them, and we're happy to have him here again tonight. This is Kory Knutz talking about the Lafayette Locks. Come on up, Kory. Let's hear it for Kory. There you go.
Are we on? Well, glad you guys could make it out tonight. Confession time. Long about Friday last week, I realized I was not going to find my presentation. It was on a thumb drive. All the photos, all my notes for doing this lost to history. So, you know, when life gives you lemons, like my mom, you got to make lemonade. So hopefully you're getting lemonade tonight. One thing it caused me to do, since we're talking about I call it liquid highways, because to set the context, and I tend to do this often, I like to know the battery's not doing very good, but I like to know what was the norm back in the day. So if we step back to 1843, very quickly we have a very huge loss of information. We look through the lens of what we see today. We look at all the infrastructure of the valley, the highways, the rivers. Even the rivers were changed. In fact, Willamette River had to be dredged out and made to use it better. It was pretty wily. Willamette would just spur off, and that's why we have, Grand Island and a lot of different splits in the river. And so for the context of, I've always focused on 1843 and then after, but having, not be lazy and get here and have to do more study, asked me to go further back in time. And well, I'm not going to go as far as Lewis and Clark, 1805 and 6, when they built Fort Clatsop, but, Astoria was incorporated or founded in 1811. And so there was some things going on here before the settlers came about. So there was the Hudson Bay Company, which is Fort Vancouver. That was founded, 1829-ish, 1825 in there. And the first fort was built not right on the Columbia, and the second one just a few short years later, because they were afraid of the natives and maybe you should, that thing is dying. Hello. So anyhow, so we had some establishment here, and at the graces of the people that were already here that had actually planted some crops. And so if you look at like the center or the nucleus of where the activity started, you would put your pin down in Oregon City. And so for those unfamiliar with what I'm talking about, Oregon City, when you're on I-205 and you go over the Willamette River, just beforehand, you can look off to the right. Who here has seen the Willamette Falls? And I'm not going to make you raise your hand if you haven't seen it and embarrass you. But that was the central hub, almost of all industry and transportation. And so in the beginning years, there was this big battle. Every town proprietor was so proud of their plot along a river somewhere, because after all, the river was about the only way you could traverse almost year round. You know, flooding caused problems, sandbars and rock spits. Those would, you know, high center a boat, that was a problem. But as the communities grew, and by 1843, when the whole manifest destiny or moving west was really underway, and when I say underway, we're only talking 1,000, 1,500 pioneers per year up until about 1850. Reason being, the gold rush triggered a lot of excitement, and there was a lot more ambition to move out west. And could you imagine getting a hearing statistic that, oh, you want to go to Oregon? Well, out of a room this large, let's say I'll round it up to 100 and be generous to myself, 10 of you would die. You wouldn't make it. And yet, year after year, that statistic really didn't change, and people kept going. So how bad do you have to want something? You know, they wanted progress, they wanted opportunity. All the land on the East Coast, pretty well developed, gobbled up. And when you have families that have 8, 10 kids, where are your 8 and 10 kids going to have their 500 acres? You know, it all just dwindled down. The opportunity was waning. So thus we have the Oregon Trail. So liquid highways. This is just a little helper picture to show you the Oregon Trail. It really doesn't say much more than there's a group of wagons circled. A lot of times there'd be about 100 wagons at a party making a 2,000-mile journey to Oregon, and they get here in the fall. You get here in the fall and, well, you don't have any shelter. You're at the graces of whoever was here. And so for the early years, 1843, late 40s, the only people that were really here were the fur traders. And as fur traders went around for the French company, the Hudson Bay Company, trappers, getting beaver, eventually they would retire from that, and some of them actually planted fields and farms in the French Prairie. French Prairie would be the St. Paul area. And so the history books will refer to some of the agriculture being just south of Oregon City. And that would include Shampooey, which is pretty important. Check out this primitive establishment. That probably looked like your first year. You got to throw up shelter and you got to do it fast. It's going to have to be log cabin, no finishes, no Victorian houses, not yet. And you need to have enough food and wheat. In fact, money was scarce. So at the beginning, they traded in wheat. Wheat was a currency in the early times because there wasn't any currency out west. And so this is obviously much later in the time period, but we're looking at muddy roads. And this is the reason why we're talking about liquid highways. Well, this is almost a liquid highway. In the winter, the only way you could get around would be as if it got cold to freeze it hard and get a wagon over the top without getting stuck. A lot of times, even downtown McMinnville right here, we're looking at, that's the Wright Building, 1893, and muddy roads till 1912. And this picture here is 1886, I think it says. Yeah. And just another muddy road between Dayton. This is actually probably west of Dayton on Ferry Street. Probably says that up there. Good, I didn't get it wrong. This here would be looking at the new First Federal Building. Got a cattle drive going right down Baker. Can you imagine how disgruntled the townspeople would be after, you know, 50 head go through there and muck it all up, and now you can't even get anything through this big old muddy mess. So now we're looking at the Dayton Bridge, and this bridge actually got wiped out once and fell down. Somewhere I read once where the Lafayette Bridge, which there was a pretty substantial Lafayette Bridge, 1851 to 1856. And as I've mentioned before in previous talks, that would be correlated with Bridge Street. So if you're coming into Lafayette while you're going north and you see Bill's Market, there's Bridge Street. And so the bridge is long gone. It didn't last more than 4 or 5 years and it washed out. And Michael, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I don't think that's Dayton. I'm pretty sure that's the Oregon City Willamette.
Oh, serious?
Yeah, look how rocky the shoreline is.
Oh, totally.
And yeah. And
See it, we're all still learning. Dang it, I can't lie to him with you in here. But he's totally right. There are no rocks on the edge of it. I took this to be Dayton. Granted, this is the second time I've actually looked at this picture because I lost my previous presentation. So, good case in point. See all the rock bluff over there? No such thing in Dayton. Dayton's all mud. And so there's your muddy Dayton pictures. This I know. I'd actually never seen the previous picture up until y'all just got here. A little bit of lemon for you. So Dayton developed pretty quickly because it had a pretty good waterfront for year-round boat traffic. This was important because all the farmers in the area had to get their wheat to some grist mill somewhere, and as in the early times, there wasn't enough grist mills close by. In fact, if they could get it down to Oregon City, there was a grist mill down there. McMinnville had one by 1853, and then Jacob Hahn, which we get Hahn Creek Road from, he apparently built about 13, or at least a dozen different mills around the valley, because he was a millwright. And Dayton they had several things, and the guy in this room that knows the most about this is right here, our next presenter. Had several warehouses. They could dry fruit. There was a brick plant at Palmer Creek. And this boat here, we're looking at the back end of it, and it's pointed downstream, and it's going to head to Oregon City, or just above the falls at North City, Oregon City. The locks in Oregon City were built in 1873, and that radically changed the ability to bring steamliners clear from San Francisco through those locks and all the way up to Dayton, Salem, and Highwater. There's areas in the Willamette that get pretty shallow even today. They would have had to continually dredge it out after major winter events. When I floated down the Willamette south of, that'd be north of Wheatland Ferry, there's times when your paddles are hitting rocks, and some of these boats only drafted 4 or 5 feet, these big flat bottom ferry boats, but that wouldn't even be enough a lot of times. So there's a lot of effort into, and here's one of those radical events. Now we're looking north, and that's in Dayton, 1911. So much later than some of the time area we're talking about. The next photo, if I remember right, it probably isn't the next one, but this also is the Dayton Bridge, and this doesn't exist today, but in its place and very closely to this same placement is the footbridge that goes over the Yam Hill that they built, I don't know, maybe in the mid-90s, I think, something like that. And so basically all the farmers got all their goods down to Dayton, and Dayton was more important waterfront wise than McMinnville. McMinnville almost had nothing until after the locks in Lafayette were built. It was noted, and it was a very popular thing in the early 1860s and 70s to make a trek from Oregon City out to Lafayette. Lafayette was considered the Athens of the West. Really. It was known to have some of the best boarders that would speak on a Sunday afternoon. And so what you could do after you had ship traffic, these ferry boats, steamboats, is you could get on a boat in the morning on Sunday, and get to Lafayette by lunchtime, have a picnic lunch or eat there in the park and listen to somebody really smart talk. And then get on the boat and go back home that evening. If you didn't take that boat, then it was an all day horse ride, right? Riding a horse all the way in to Oregon City. By the time you get there, you would have to stay the night and then travel the next day. So here's another picture. We can see some of the plank sidewalks down the side. Previously, there was a picture of water over this roof at about that angle. Water would have went all the way up to about that area of that building during major floods. And there were several of them. In fact, that's the reason why, I think the next photo. Yeah, look at that. Just terrible. That's 1890. Then we were looking at a similar angle of this earlier, and here's the water. Almost looks like the sidewalks are floating up. Look at that. I just noticed that down here. Floating sidewalks, which was a real problem when they built roads out of, they called them corduroy roads. So one way to try to get your wagon over the mud was to cut a bunch of small branches about the size of my arm or maybe a little smaller, lay them in the road, and they'd all just get smushed together and kind of make a log mat, and you could drive on that. But of course, the obvious problem is just what we're looking at here. You get a big flood and then a wave floats your road. And it was a big deal when a transportation company would start up a new line and add a service. And of course, there were so many landings along the Willamette. I was just looking at a book that I was just given. It's just stunning how many different landings were along the Willamette River. And basically, if you had a good landing where there's deep enough water, it was an attractive spot for boats to pull up and stop. If there's, like I'm thinking about Lincoln on your way to Salem. Lincoln, today about the only thing that remains is the Lincoln store and non-ethanol gas. But that had a half-mile long waterfront, and it was a big deal. It was a very popular spot to bring a lot of the harvests. We had berries up in the hills and prunes. In the 1880s, Yamaha County had one of the largest prune orchards collectively than almost the whole entire world. So all that produce needed to get it onto the water, and we needed to sell it to places beyond Yamaha County because there was more fruit than anybody could eat here. Who would want to eat that many prunes? So if we could get it down to San Francisco, then it was after 1869, it could go as far as on the Transcontinental Railroad all the way to the East Coast, a lot easier. After 1914, we did have the Panama Canal to cut off, not having to go all the way around the south tip of South America. So that was helpful. And even in 1851, it was noted that 5 female school teachers came 1851. So now we're going way back a lot further again. They came to Oregon and they were hired from, I think it was Maine or somewhere on the extreme East Coast. And they thought they were going to die by the time they got here. Everything was pretty good, until they got to about Oregon City. And then they got stuck up on a sandbar or a gravel spit. And all their captains, everyone driving the ship was drunk on whiskey. And it was cold and it was turned rainy. And, a few of them built a big bonfire, outside on the shoreline after a bit. They said they were supperless, and one of the gals got really sick, and they all survived. But several in that party that came through Panama, and this is before the canal was there, so they would have had to go overland for whatever, I don't know how many miles that strip is, 50, 60, 80, I don't remember. Somebody in here probably knows. Anyway, she made it, she survived, and it was just an intriguing story of how primitive our transportation was back then. And of course, as it went along, it was definitely a lot more formal. I mean, they'd have a band playing music, adorn all the railings with garland, and it was a very positive thing. It was exciting to see this kind of transportation hit your local area because it changed your economy extremely. In fact, there's a town called Lynn City just across the shore from Oregon City. And the proprietor that was trying to sell that whole idea, it never really stuck. There was some development there, but it just didn't pick up the pace. Now, I think the thing to notice, this is my favorite picture actually, and it's just going to totally. I'll just let my previous thought die, and we'll just talk about this. Over here is a little locomotive. That would have been the Farmers Railroad in 1878-ish. I mean, I guess I can look at my notes, but so Dayton had railroad for a little bit, and although we're talking about the liquid highways, now I'm talking about railroad again. Railroad was the death of the liquid highways. You could lay track a lot more places than ever. And what I like about this photo, little ladders and slides, they'd slide bushels of wheat down into the ship. Before we had these ships, there was something called flatboats, and one as long as 65 feet, and it would haul, I think 350 bushels of wheat. And you go, well, what's a bushel of wheat? Well, wheat is 60 pounds. And so one thing I had wanted to mention was out of that 350 bushels of wheat, they basically had 4 natives oaring that boat back and forth. They were paid $16 to take it from Dayton to Kanawha, or I don't even know if I'm saying that name right, but the name means place for canoes, and it was an Indian name. And so when I say Kanawha, if I'm saying it right, that is basically a little rocky beach that's just above the Willamette Falls. And so it was a natural place to portage, take your stuff off, go around those big, scary, dangerous, deadly falls, and then start back again. And then you could go to the rest of the world on the other side of those falls. In 1851, the first steamship showed up above those falls. In fact, in Kanawha, there was a little building spot, and they made some of these boats. And so it happened pretty quick. So in May, there was the first boat, the Hoosier. And then June, there was the Washington. In September, there was the Kanawha. And there's another little tall tale that I could hardly even believe is true. But one of the steamboats, called the Elk, was traveling just about a mile downstream from the Yamhill River mouth. Yes, when it enters the Willamette. And apparently the boiler blew up, and Captain Jerome said he flew clear up in the sky, and he could look down the stack of the boiler, and he landed in a cottonwood tree. And for decades, for all the captains that went by would point very peculiar looking cottonwood tree and tell you this story, and you go, yeah, pretty embellished. But anyhow, there is Dayton, and this is pretty much what a lot of your smaller towns, waterfronts would look like. So today you think of Buena Vista down by Independence. There's nothing to look at when you go down to the river, not much left. Dayton, same way. If you go upstream just a little bit, there's still some pilings where the wharfs were. And here, this was a common problem. They were deeper into this than they wanted to be. Basically, one of the main problems of a little narrow Yamhill River, or any river in fact, would be snags. Trees that would fall off the bank, float down, get poked in, and then unbeknownst to the captain, you're going down, all of a sudden one of those snags just goes right through the sidewall of your boat. And the good news is you didn't have far to sink, because look at there. It'd probably sink about 7-8 feet, still a heck of a time to get it right pulled out. So they would dredge rivers a lot, and sometimes clear a lot of the vegetation off the sides, which would in turn actually create more erosion if you don't have any roots holding it. But all of this industry also came at a cost. And at a time, I think we live in an era where we're very conscious about environmental impact. In fact, we probably hear so much we're tired of hearing about it. But By 1910 or 1920, actually, it was noted that the Willamette River was an open sewer. I mean, nobody would swim in it. In 1944, they did a study and it revealed that there was zero oxygen below the Willamette Falls, incapable, they couldn't have there was no aquatic life present. So we've made major progress. If you think about, I swim in the Willamette, you know, maybe not so much the Yam Hill all the time, but so we've made progress. Along some of my musings and rafting the rivers, I did come across these two twin towers, and Gary Brooks told me some cool stuff about it. And the location, I'll go to the next picture to give you some context. So what we're looking at, it's a ways off the free, I know. So this is Dayton. This is the Water Dog RV Park. And here's Highway 99 going up, like Firestone Farms used to be Lobby Orchards. And then if you were to just go behind those properties back on the river, you would see this, well, you wouldn't see the yellow arrow, but you'd see those towers I just showed you. And Gary, say a couple things about what you're telling me about those towers.
For many years, they dumped logs in the Yam Hill River and rafted logs down either the mills above Oregon City or through the mills below Oregon City, even down to Portland. So I suspect that's those are towers that were only unloading where they just dumped the logs in the river. And there was half a dozen between there and Newburgh. Yeah.
And how many times I've rafted past that and been absolutely puzzled, like, what in the world is this for? I've looked at property boundaries, trying to figure out. It also wouldn't have been very far from the railroad, which went right past here. And at one point, if you've ever seen the county road sign, Full Courts Landing, that was a very important place in the 1870s, 1880s. It was a point where William Reed, who built basically the town of Dundee, but more importantly, he was in charge of all the railroad narrow gauges that went from Dayton to Sheridan, and he was on a quest to get clear to California. And long story there, I won't get into, but he didn't make it. But he was building a bridge at Full Courts Landing, and Ray's Landing was across the river. And he was always, a lot of farmers would, if they had property on the river, well, they'd build a ferry and then they could make some money almost any time of the year, bringing goods and things across the river. So this naturally we would have to go to talking about the locks in Lafayette. So the locks, this is obviously a construction picture of the chamber, and basically it's the chamber, you know, if you're not familiar with how the locks work, I'm sure most of you know, but you come in the river and the river's starting to get too shallow. And so they make a chamber where you can drive your boat in, shut the gate behind you. I think the next picture might be a gate picture. Well, it's not. But what we're looking at is a little boat in this 125-foot long chamber that pooled water behind the dam 16 higher. And so with 16 feet higher, it put the river above or from Lafayette to McMinnville at a flood stage that was pretty substantial. That did allow some boats to get up to McMinnville most of the time. But it really made Lafayette, you know, more accessible. But it was, I wouldn't say it was too little too late. It was a lot to put the locks in, but it was way too late. These locks and this whole concept were a pipe dream of 1850. Like if Lafayette could have had this intact, like maybe at the same time that the 1873 locks were built in Oregon City, Lafayette would probably be the county seat still. And that would be if Lafayette could also procure a railroad connection. This is why a lot of landings that had cities associated with them just dried up. Cities like Salem, which had a railroad crossing through and boat traffic, they were deemed, or they were destined to survive and be well. And so when Dayton lost its railroad connection due to a flood, the William Reed guy did not relocate his main terminus in Dayton anymore, because Dayton wanted $8,000 to replace, you know, well, I'm not wording that quite right. William Reed goes to the city councilors or whoever and says, hey, I'm not excited about building railroad here and making Dayton my hub because it's prone to flood. You're too low in elevation. We can fix it, but what's the guarantee that this isn't gonna happen again? Well, there's no guarantee. And so he said, I'll do it if you give the company $8,000 to rebuild, because it had a turn locomotives. In fact, the railroad track went all the way. If you've been down at the boat ramp at Dayton, you see a peculiar grade. The boat ramp's kind of weird there, because if you've ever seen it, you have to go and turn a 90-degree angle, your trailer down to the ramp. Well, that very flat parking lot that's right above it was where the railroad tracks ran across. And I think it's Gary and I's theory that probably the track went ahead onto a trestle at Palmer Creek and went to the little brick yard or the brick plant that made bricks in Dayton as well. But anyway, Dayton loses its terminus for railroad, and then that was where Dundee, the idea of Dundee was spawned. This is kind of a stubborn little microphone. It keeps shutting off. And so now we're looking upstream, and we're looking right there are the gates that you can close. There's a little one into the other. There's a big a pulley system that you would draw the gates closed, and as soon as they're closed, obviously the lock would fill up with the river water that's just running in and lift you up to the next level. And well, I think I've done a good job of getting done at, what time is it? Oh, no way. Really? No, I don't. But that's my portion. So next we're gonna have Gary come up and talk about the bricks, Willamina.